Somebody else want to add?
DUI fatalities. Here's. Go ahead.
Well,
go for it.
Just in the highway deaths, and this is direct quote, DUI arrests involving marijuana have skyrocketed, as have traffic fatalities where marijuana was found in the system of one of the drivers. And that's Montana's law, just like Proposition 203, is written so poorly that drug abusers that who have nothing wrong with them can get all of the pots that they want.
I'll just give, there are lots of people here with more knowledge than I, but you asked for statistics. I'll give you one statistic. In California, the number of fatal accidents involving people using marijuana doubled immediately after their initiative was adopted. A second, perhaps more interesting or colorful statistic is that in Denver, Colorado, there are more pot shops than there are Starbucks. So if you know how many Starbucks there are around the town, if you want to see that many pot shops, then then you want to pass this initiative.
Anyone?
Would it be better to just, or some have said that it would be better to go ahead and legalize pot, regulate it, and tax the heck out of it, and take the profit incentive out of marijuana selling?
Well, first of all, this is a not-for-profit scheme for the dispensaries. But secondly, that debate is exactly the debate that does not occur if this initiative passes. This initiative cuts off any debate about whether or not marijuana has medicinal value. It cuts off any debate about whether or not we should legalize marijuana. This initiative cuts off a debate where employers could be heard about whether or not they want to run a drug-free workplace. It cuts off any debate where landlords could be heard about whether or not they ought to have some say-so in whether or not somebody is going to grow marijuana in their home. It cuts off a debate where we could hear from the doctors and from the scientific community about the pros and cons of marijuana, and it cuts off a debate where law enforcement and I could be heard about whether or not people ought to be able to drive with marijuana in their system. This initiative, 35 pages, becomes law, every single word of it, and is protected by the Voter Protection Act, which means the legislature cannot repeal it and cannot modify it in a way inconsistent without three-quarter vote of the legislature. It cuts off a debate that maybe should occur. This initiative needs to be separated from that debate, because that is the debate that people do not get if we pass this initiative. By the way, this initiative brought to us by an out-of-state group, the Marijuana Policy Project out of Washington, D.C.
Sorry, if I could comment on that, because back in 1996, I made the argument that this was really a movement towards legalization. It was an incremental step towards legalization, and that's what this is. It's just another step. I mean, we have medical marijuana on the books. Everybody does understand that. It was passed. We do have it. Now we're allowing through the dispensaries. And California, when we started, now what do they have on their books? I mean, as an initiative this year? The legalization of marijuana. It's a fair question of whether or not we should legalize it or not. I welcome that debate, but they don't want that debate.
But Mr. Romley, if we're going to talk about medical marijuana versus a legalization debate in this slippery slope argument, do you think that the voters of Arizona are intelligent enough to understand the distinction that if this passes now, 4 years from now, if a legalization or decriminalization ballot initiative comes to them, they can draw a distinction and say, yes to medical marijuana, no to decriminalization. Can the voters make that distinction?
I think that the voters are very bright. And actually, that's why you're here today. We're asking for your help to at least give out our side of the argument. We don't ask you to take a position. We're asking you to get out our side of the argument. You've got the community, state leaders that are coming out and giving you argument after argument after argument as to why they should say no on 203. I do have faith in the voters. I do believe in the voters. But we've got to have that fair debate. Right now, it's the smoke screen. That is exactly what this is. It's a smoke screen to eventually move this towards legalization without there really being a conscious debate as to whether or not we want to legalize marijuana. And that's why, I guess I'm in such opposition. They're characterizing it under, Americans are empathetic, sympathetic to those that have serious medical conditions. We want to provide them with medicines that help them. Morphine, it's a derivative of opium. So we do use very, very strong drugs in certain medical purposes, but you don't decide what's good medicine at the ballot box.
The American Medical Association on that point has said that this should no longer be a Schedule I drug. The AMA is on record as saying this should be rescheduled because there may be, in some circumstances, at least legitimate research purposes, if not medical purposes, that should be looked at.
Then that needs to be debated in Congress, and they need to sit there and hear those types of arguments. I don't have, if the medical community comes forward with it, if the medical community today said, we support utilizing marijuana as a medicine for certain types of things, who am I? I mean, that's the medical community, but that's not what we're having today. In 1996, they made an argument that, we want marijuana to be used because I think most people know that marijuana helps increase the appetite of an individual. It provides a benefit. But what the FDA does is that they compare the benefits to the negative consequences with it. But what they failed to say is that marijuana also reduces one's immune system. And what is AIDS? It's a reduction of one's immune system to be able to cope with that debilitating disease. That's really what it is. So maybe eat a little bit better, but in a way, the consequences of potentially dying increase dramatically. Let the medical community decide. Don't do this at the ballot box.
Congressman Shadegg had a question. This obviously has been on the ballot now for several months. It got onto the ballot pretty easily. But we're just now, weeks after early balloting started, starting to hear from politicians about their opposition just 6 days before the election. Why are we just now hearing from congressmen and senators in this type of forum?
I don't think you've been to any of my recent events. Quite frankly, I think every one of us has spoken out at every event we've had where we get asked a question about this, and I often bring it up on my own. I think this is the nature of elections. Actually, before early voting, this is when all of the intensity kind of focused. But I know I've been on record as opposed to this initiative from the get-go, and I believe everybody up here is. So,
let me just add one other thing to that. There's a huge amount of money being brought in from out of state by a very few people in support of this proposition. And there is no organized opposition to it. As a result of that, what we have seen, we decided to visit with you today about our opposition, which has been out there for a long time. Because through what is called earned media, we hope to earn a story from you as a result of this, you can help educate the public as to the other side of the story, rather than the public just seeing the side that's being paid for by these pro-legalization forces out of state.
Thank you very much.
And by the way, Frank, to your question, the two county attorneys explained in some detail why this proposition is not regulated use of marijuana. That's one of the reasons it's a fraud, and why, as Sheila said, all of that debate is foreclosed if this thing ever gets passed. Thank you all very much.